Hi everyone and welcome to this week's episode of Gaffer and Gear. Today we're looking at this little compact light. It's the NANlite Forza 500. So it's a 500 watt LED cob light, single source. It uses Bowen's mount accessories. It is extremely well built and it is bright. So basically this thing is realistically comparable to a 1.2K HMI. Now if that hasn't grabbed your attention yet, maybe this will tweak your interest a bit. It's currently running off 2 V-Lock batteries. Okay, so before we get too deep into the video, I do need to point out that this is a prototype or the first factory release runs that are going out for testing. So basically, people like me get a hold of these lights so that we can test them and point out faults before they release the product. So that's something I've really got to point out because at some point in the video, I'm going to turn this on and you're going to hear the cooling fan. That's a prototype issue. So the other thing too I want to point out is that of course means that the power supply unit, which is this section here, will probably not look like this. I suspect it'll either have heat sinks or it'll have bigger, slower running fans on it. So it probably won't look much like this at the point of release. Okay, so the next thing I raised as an issue for me as a professional user with the prototype here is the head lead. So it's going to sell with a 2 meter head lead. They're also going to have a 5 meter head lead as an option. Because look, this is super powerful, super lightweight, super small. The biggest limitation of it is a 2 meter head lead. So that is something that is being addressed. This light basically can run off batteries. So the idea is this power supply removes, and there's your battery mounts. Now it's 500 watt. It's a 500 watt lamp head. So lamp head, it doesn't have a lamp in it anymore. It's a 500 watt LED. So basically it runs off two 26 volt 10 amp V-Locks. That's the minimum that you need. If you've ever looked into buying that sort of capacity V-Lock, you go, well, it's just not going to happen. It's too expensive. So there's no point having a beautiful light like this that can run off batteries if nobody can afford the battery. So that's an issue that is being addressed. So the Australian distributor here, which is Protog, is actually in discussions with a battery manufacturer at the moment, trying to get affordable batteries made. So they're hoping that they'll have two 260 watt hour 26 volt V-Lock batteries with chargers for about the 1,200 Australian dollar price point, which would make that very affordable. Okay, now in terms of this video, I'm not going to cover things like the build quality, the usability of this unit, things like that, the menu system and all that, because it's pretty much identical to the 300. I've already done a video on that, so go have a look at that video. The link is below, because I've really got to get this video shot because this stuff's got to go out. Or this stuff's got to go to the next person interstate to have a look at. But one thing I just really want to show very quickly is, you know, this is a 1.2K comparable light, 1.2K HMI comparable light, and look at that, small finger, okay, small finger holdable. So, you know, a massive amount of firepower that you can have hooked up onto a stand, self-contained, running off batteries. Unbelievable. I wouldn't have believed it a few years back. Now, the one thing a lot of you want to know, because I've been inundated with messages in the last couple of days when I put the little teaser video out showing that I had this for testing, a lot of people want to know how bright is it without the reflector on, so that you've got some idea of how bright it is going through a softbox. Okay, so let's turn it around, and once again, ignore the fan noise, that's going to get sorted out. Okay, so basically it's a hard light source at the moment, so I wanted to compare it to another hard daylight light source. So I didn't want to compare it to a panel light, for example. I thought I'd compare it to HMI Fresnels. Okay, so compared to a 575 HMI Fresnel, this unit with no reflector on it is 60% brighter. Okay, so 60% brighter than a 575 HMI Fresnel. Now, comparing it to a 1.2K HMI Fresnel, so that's a decent, proper 1.2K with a bigger lens, not some compact piece of crap. a big lens Fresnel, this comes in at roughly half the brightness, okay? So some of you might be thinking that's a huge difference between a 575 and a 1.2K Fresnel. I must have got my numbers wrong. With the 1.2, because it's a bigger, physically bigger unit, you've got your globe and you've got a way bigger reflector, and you've got a way bigger lens on the other side. So you've got a bigger catchment area for the light and more like it's thrown out the front, which is why gaffers tend to like having big Fresnels and not little compact lights. But anyway, now let's compare it with the reflector on. Okay, so how bright is this with the reflector on? So before we get into that, I just want to point out something about the reflector on this. It is not your typical silver Bowens dish, okay? So this is what we call faceted. So basically it's got a whole stack of lenses pressed into it, or not lenses, sorry, a whole stack of reflective surfaces pressed into it to bounce as much light forward. Now the difference between this and say an M18, because you would have seen reflectors like this in HMIs, is with a HMI you've got a globe that moves around in the center. So there's a lot of approximations with where the facets go because the globe's never in the same spot all the time. Whereas with a cob light like this, it is a fixed position, so they can absolutely put the facets in the correct spot to get the most power out of the unit all the time. So what I'm getting at there is the incredible brightness of this unit, because I'm going to compare it to a 1.2 HMI, isn't so much the lamp head here. A heck of a lot of it is the proper tuned reflector. So that can make a huge difference with if you're buying other Bowens mount accessories, you might put them on and not have the brightness you're anticipating. So that's something that's worth pointing out. Okay, so let's fire this thing up and turn it around. Now to give you some idea of brightness levels, I'm currently lit with a 350 watt Aladdin fabric light, and that is running at 100% power 2 meters away. Okay, so this is probably stupidly bright. Let's turn this down to say 50%. That'll do. All right, so what a lot of you wanted to me to compare this to was a Joker 800 with a, a zoom beamer. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. I actually don't own any 800 watt HMI lights. Okay, I don't own any at all. So when I got into HMIs in Australia, we didn't really have anything in the 800 watt bracket. It was 575 and 1.2. By the time stuff started coming out in 800 watt, I already owned 17 HMIs, so I wasn't interested in buying any more. Comparing this with its reflector on to a Joker 800 with its, what's that thing called? Zoom beamer in flood, both at 3 meters. The Forza comes in at 29% brighter. Okay, so now I said I don't have a Joker 800. I got that result by actually taking a reading off someone else's Joker 800. Okay, now here's where I have to eat some humble pie. Now, a couple of episodes back, I said that HMIs only have good color render on 1.2Ks and higher. The color render I got off this this Joker 800 with its Osram globe was really good. It came in at a 96 TM30 or 96% TM30. So very, very, very good. So whilst this is marginally brighter, so 29% I call marginally brighter. Whilst this is marginally brighter than a Joker 800, the Joker 800 at full output at 100% brightness does have superior color rendering depending on the globe that's in it. However, when you dim the Joker down to 50%, or you dim any HMI down, the color render changes. So the color render dropped to 81, whereas with this unit, when you dim this, the Kelvin changes a little bit, about 50 degrees Kelvin, but pretty much all your color scores remain the same. Okay, so let's talk about comparing this now to a 1.2K HMI, because in the intro I said that it's realistically comparable to a 1.2K HMI. Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit long-winded on this because one of the problems that we have as gaffers is a manufacturer comes out with a new light, compares it to another light, makes a statement, and cinematographers just lose it. And they go, oh, we've got to have this new light. And then they approach us gaffers and we go, yeah, we've got lights that can already do the same job. Why do you want us to spend tens of thousands of dollars on something that's not as good? It would have been very easy for me to get this 1.2K, put it into full flood with the globe, and then drop a frosted lens in and say, hey, the Forza is over twice as bright as this, okay? Now, that wouldn't be lying, that would be the case, but it's not painting an accurate picture. So I'm going to give you scenarios where we compare this to a 1.2. Okay, so let's paint a scenario. So the other night, I took this unit out and just out the front here, ran it off 2 batteries and basically floodlit the house across the road. Okay, so with this. So how did that compare to the 1.2 here? Well, matching up the beam angle, so this is with the reflector on, matching up the beam angle was basically this unit in the spot position with the globe and the dapple reflector. Gave us pretty much matching beam angle, pretty much similar characteristics, very even across the beam. Now, this unit actually came in at 7% brighter than the HMI. So that's pretty staggering, okay? So if I was doing that with HMI and we're out somewhere where we didn't have access to power, I'd have to run a generator. Okay, so I'd have to get the generator far enough away that we don't hear it, all of those hassles. This thing, stick it on 2 batteries and off and running, okay? So here's the thing. You've probably listened to that and you're going, oh wow, this thing is as bright as a 1.2. So here's the problem we have as gaffers is a little 30-second sound bite like that leads to the wrong conclusions. Okay, so let's paint a different scenario, okay? In this scenario, let's say we want to bounce light off the roof. Okay, so we're in a house, just want to get the ambience up, we're just bouncing light off the roof, okay? Now in that scenario, we don't care that the ceiling's perfectly evenly lit. So in that scenario, basically with this unit, I would put the globe into the flood position and basically just tilt it straight up, okay? So in that scenario, the HMI actually comes in at over 3 times brighter, okay? So given the scenario that you're working in, this unit is brighter than a 1.2 and it is also nowhere near as bright as a 1.2 given your scenario. Okay, so the next thing we'll talk about is heat. Okay, so basically here you've got a 500 watt LED array. So if you have a look in this photo, you can see all of the LEDs all bunched together. Now the reason this photo looks green is I actually had to take it through welding goggles with the light at 1%. That's the only way I could get a photo of it. Now, to give you some idea, 500 watts in that space. Now the average 1 foot by 1 foot panel is 50 watts. So this is 10 times that in a little space. So that's pretty staggering, okay? So there is a lot of heat there. So how hot is it? So let's fire it up and have a look. So let's put a gel on the front and see what happens. Okay, so I'm about probably 3 centimeters off. Okay, so it is hot enough that it will damage your gels. Okay, so if you don't know how to do your gel management, basically if you get the gel too close to it or you trap the heat in with your gel, it can be an issue. So we're now getting LEDs that are powerful enough that they start having heat issues like our old lights have. So one thing to bear in mind with that is if you are, say, going to put a gel to the front of the unit, don't tape it flat so it can't ventilate, okay? You want to have a bit of space top and bottom so the air can flow through. Now the reason you want to do that is so you don't actually overheat the cob, because if you overheat the cob, it'll start to go green. Now the next thing I want to point out with this unit in terms of the heat is accessories. So things like your soft boxes, stuff like that, yeah, no problem at all. But if you're using a sealed photographic accessory, something that optically changes the light, like a Fresnel lens, you would want to make sure that it is actually matched to this unit and it can actually ventilate properly. Otherwise, what will happen is you will slowly overheat the cob, and 3 to 4 hours into your shoot, the colours will start to change slightly. Okay, so as you can see, this thing has a whopping big fan in it. So it's a 500 watt LED light. Basically, the bulk of it is basically heat management. So how loud is this fan? Well, the best way I can describe it is if I got all of the equipment that I own that makes a noise, whether it's a buzzing HMI, I got a cooling fan in it, and drew a line and went, right, everything that the sound recordist has ever complained about we'll put on that side. Every device that they've never complained about we'll put on this side. this would be on a par with the loudest device that a sound recordist hasn't complained about. So I'm not too worried about it. Okay, so just to show it to you, I've got this running off battery, so we don't have any cooling fan here. And we're being a little bit stupid here. I've got the fan facing right towards me, and let's see if you can hear it. That's not the fan, that's my neighbour, by the way. Okay, now for a bit of controversy here at Gaffer and Gear. I've been told that this won't run off remote control clickers. I've been told that it will, and I've been told that it won't. So I've decided to lash out, and I got on eBay and spent $20 on a NANlite controller. So that's $20 including postage, handling, and GST. So that probably works out to, I don't know, $10 US or maybe 10 billion rupee. I'm not sure how the exchange rates go. But let's have a look, see if it works. Well, here's the thing I've got to tell you. $20 controller, basically the cheapest controller you can get from NANlite, runs these lights no problem at all. In fact, this will run 99 channels. Okay, so you could have 99 of these all separately running and set them all. So a little crappy controller like this, you wouldn't expect it to transmit far. I found that this works reliably up to 30 meters, and it'll work touch and go at 50 meters. So I went down the end of the street, gave it a go, and I was extremely surprised that it worked. Okay, so I just suddenly had a crazy thought. Let's just open the roller door and see what this thing can do on an overcast day. Now I do want to point out it is an overcast afternoon, so don't expect this to replace an 18K anytime soon, but you got to admit, off two V-Lock batteries, that's pretty damn impressive. Control's a lot of fun too. Okay, so let's talk batteries. So basically you need minimum 260 watt hour 26 volt batteries, so 10 amps. That's your minimum. Now these will run the light at full power for about 50 minutes. Okay, so that's a new battery, 50 minutes. So a sort of a rule of thumb with V-Lock batteries is if you're flattening the battery in less than an hour, you're doing damage to the battery. So what that means is they're not going to last 8 to 10 years. You might get 4 to 5 years out of them. Okay, so you've got to factor that into your pricing when you're billing. Okay, that these are I suppose a bit of a long-term expendable. Okay, they're not going to last forever. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, if you can find something that'll run it for longer than an hour, I think Hawks Woods have a battery that's 350 watts, 26 volts, but that's 800 US bucks a pop. Okay, so here's what I'm going to be doing with the system if I go ahead and buy some. I'll be using the V-Locks when we need these things to be absolutely portable. So if I'm going down a dirt track or something like that, and I just want the batteries mounted in here, all contained on the stand, I'll be going these. The rest of the time, if I need to run it off batteries, I'll be going an external battery pack like this unit here, okay? So this is a lithium-ion battery pack. This case will run this unit for 2 hours and 40 minutes, continuous at 100%. So if you're looking to make up a battery pack to run off the external power inlet, you basically really need to have it regulated. So it needs to go through a DC to DC inverter to stabilize the power, because a 48 volt battery is not 48 volts when it's fully charged. So you'll blow this up. You'll blow up any 48 volt light if you just plug a 48 volt battery in. So I've got a whole video on this, link below on this system. Now, one last thing I almost forgot. The inlet here is not a standard Nutrix connector. So this is a standard Nutrix plug. So what's the difference? Well, basically the on-off switch here doesn't work. So if you're going to make a battery system up for this, have a external on-off switch on your battery. Okay, it's been a long day. I've got to wrap up. So let's have a look at the spectrometer results. It's a monocolor light, so it's going to be a really quick technical review. So with no reflector on, the unit came in at 5,741 Kelvin. So that's not bad, pretty close to 5.6. The DUV, which is how close it is to the Planckian curve, how pure the white is, 4 increments out towards pink. So to give you an idea, 24 increments is a 1/8 correction gel. So this is incredibly close to pure white. Fantastic. The TLCI score comes in at 97. So here is the TM30 graph. Again, the color render is 91% with 99% average saturation. Now here are the individual CRI scores. With the exception of R12, they're all pretty respectable high numbers. And here's the spectrum graph. So that looks pretty typical of a daylight balanced LED. Now the next set of scores are with the reflector on. So there are pretty much no gremlins in the coatings here. Pretty much everything's almost identical. So the CCT is 5,739 Kelvin. The DUV remained at 4 increments out. The TLCI remained at 97. The TM30 color test remained at 91% color rendition with a 99 average saturation. The CRI scores are more or less identical. And there are no real evident changes in the spectrum. Now the next readings are for the light with no reflector but dimmed to 50% brightness. So the CCT did drop to 5,699 Kelvin. The DUV did shift, so it has gone from ever so imperceivably pink to ever so slightly imperceivably green. The TLCI score did increase 1% and go up to 98. Having a look at the TM30 chart, pretty much nothing's moved. It's still 91 color rendition with a 99 average saturation. Here are the individual CRI scores, and even dim to 50%, nothing's changed here. And the spectrum is pretty much identical. I'm Andrew Locke, hope you enjoyed this episode of Gaffer and Gear. Yeah, the Forza 500. I'm really keen on it. NANlite, the only thing you have to do for me is get that power supply quiet, then count me in for buying 2 to 3 of these at least. See you on the next episode of Gaffer and Gear.